bottle was empty. I tipped it again, a useless gesture, and a single lukewarm drop hit my tongue. It tasted like tin and regret. I set the glass down on the wooden coffee table, adding another ring to the collection of faint, white circles that marked its surface. My apartment. A box on the 7th floor of a building that had given up decades ago. The air was thick, with the smell of old takeout and dust. My thumb moved on its own, smearing grease across the phone screen. A constant, mindless scroll through nothing. Work emails I wouldn't read. News headlines I didn't care about. Then, an ad. A cheerful, blue and white graphic of a stylized brain with a gear turning inside it. Struggling after a traffic incident. PTSD is real. Our counselors can help. I flinched. A physical jolt, like a small static shock. My thumb stopped moving. I stared at the words, the letters sharp and clean against the phone's glow. Fucking ad trackers, I mumbled to the empty room. My voice sounded rough, unused. Reading my goddamn thoughts now. I imagined tiny, invisible machines crawling through the internet, sniffing out my search history, my late-night anxieties, my half-typed then deleted messages. Just some algorithm. A cold, unfeeling piece of code that had accidentally guessed right. I swiped it away, the ad vanishing with a flick of my thumb. But the image of it was burned onto the back of my eyelids. The unease it left behind was a physical thing, a cold spot forming in the center of my chest. I pushed myself off the worn sofa. The springs groaned in protest. I walked to the window, my bare feet sticking slightly to the cheap laminate flooring. 7 stories down, the street was a black ribbon cut by the occasional slice of headlights. A car would pass, its red taillights shrinking to pinpricks, and then the street would be empty again. No one was out there. No one was watching. It was just another Tuesday night, or maybe Wednesday morning. They were starting to blur together. I rested my forehead against the cool glass of the window pane. The city's low hum was the only sound. Then another sound cut through it. My phone. It was on the coffee table, vibrating against the wood, a frantic buzzing noise. I turned from the window. The screen was lit up, casting a pale, unnatural light on the ceiling. Unknown number. My first instinct was to ignore it. A telemarketer. A wrong number. It would stop. But it didn't. It kept buzzing, insistent, demanding. Something inside me, some stupid, leftover piece of curiosity, wouldn't let it go. I walked back and picked it up. The plastic was warm. I pressed the green icon. Hello? Silence. Not the silence of a dropped call, but a heavy, waiting silence. I could hear the faint electronic hiss of an open line. I could feel the presence of someone on the other end holding their breath. Hello? I said again, my voice sharper this time. Annoyance was starting to bubble up. Who is this? A sound came through the speaker. A gasp, a sharp, wet intake of air, like someone had just surfaced from underwater, fighting for their life. It was a sound of pure panic, and it was familiar, so horribly, chillingly familiar. Then a single, choked whisper. A word I couldn't make out, garbled by fear. Click. The line went dead. The screen returned to my boring wallpaper, a default image of a mountain I had never seen. I stood there, phone in hand, my own breathing suddenly loud in my ears. Some drunk, it had to be. Some hammered asshole dialing random numbers and breathing into the phone. But the sound. I couldn't shake the sound. Or the feeling that I knew it. Knew it like I knew my own name. I tossed the phone onto the sofa and went to the kitchen, grabbing a glass and filling it with tap water. The water tasted like chlorine. I drank it all, the cold liquid doing nothing to wash away the feeling crawling up my spine. It rang again. I froze, the empty glass still in my hand. The buzzing from the living room was louder this time, more violent. I didn't want to look. I knew it was the same unknown number. A persistent drunk. But I had to look. I had to make it stop. I walked back into the living room, my steps slow, deliberate. My eyes were fixed on the couch where the phone lay, vibrating on a cushion. I reached it and looked down at the screen. My blood turned to ice water. It wasn't an unknown number. The screen showed a picture of my own face, a stupid selfie I'd taken last year for my contacts profile, my hair a mess, a fake smile plastered on. Beneath it, in stark white letters, was my name. Cole. And under my name, my own phone number. My own number was calling me. The sound of my heart was a hammer in my ears. This wasn't a drunk. This wasn't a wrong number. A trick. It had to be a technical glitch, a spoofing scam I'd read about. That was the only rational explanation, but rationality felt a million miles away. All I could feel was a deep, primal certainty that this was wrong. The air in the room felt thin. The guilt, the thing I kept buried under a mountain of sleepless nights and cheap liquor, began to stir. This is it. This is the punishment. The thought came out of nowhere, sharp and clear as a bell. Is this how it starts? Am I finally breaking? My hand trembled. I couldn't answer it. I couldn't touch it. I jabbed a finger at the red decline button, but my finger was shaking so hard I missed. I swiped at it, a clumsy, panicked motion. It felt hot, like I was touching a live wire. I threw it. The phone flew through the air, tumbling end over end, and landed with a soft thud in the center of the sofa cushions. I backed away from it, one step, then another, until my back hit the cool plaster of the far wall. I stared at the phone. A black, silent rectangle. Waiting. And then the screen lit up again. It hadn't stopped ringing, it had answered itself. The call was on speakerphone. A sound came from the small speaker. A soft, rhythmic sound. H, 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 H. Breathing. My own breathing. I stood perfectly still against the wall, holding my breath, listening. The breathing from the phone continued, steady and even. It wasn't an echo. It was a recording. Or something else. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had to move. I had to do something. I peeled myself off the wall and took a single, shuffling step forward on the laminate floor. My bare foot made a soft, scraping sound. From the phone, a half-second later, the exact same sound came from the speaker. The soft scrape of a single footstep. I stopped dead. My mind refused to process it. I waited. The delayed sound of my own movement echoed back at me from the couch. It was listening. No, it was more than that. It was experiencing it with me, just a fraction of a second behind. A phantom twin in my own room. My eyes darted around the apartment. The door was chained. The window was locked. My gaze fell on the closet at the far end of the room, a cheap, particle board wardrobe that came with the apartment. The door was slightly ajar, as it always was. It never closed properly. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't gone near it. A new sound came from the phone. A long, low creak. The sound of old wood groaning on a rusty hinge. The sound of my closet door opening. I stared at the closet. The door hadn't moved. It was still exactly as it was, a dark sliver of blackness visible in the gap. But the sound had been real. I had heard it. Clear as day. It was happening somewhere. To someone. And it was broadcasting the audio into my living room. Silence followed. A thick, suffocating silence that lasted an eternity. Maybe 10 seconds. I didn't breathe. I just stood there, a statue staring at a piece of technology on a couch. My entire world shrunk down to that one piece of plastic and glass. Then the voice came. It was my voice. Unmistakable. But it was a version of me I had never heard before. It was stripped of everything. No anger, no annoyance. Just a hollow, bottomless well of despair. A voice that had seen the end and had accepted it. It spoke one sentence, the words clear and steady, carried on a final, ragged breath. It started. Click. The line went dead. The speaker fell silent. The screen went dark. The phone was just a phone again, lying inert on the sofa cushion. But the room was different now. The air was different. The shadows were deeper. I stood there in the absolute quiet, my mind replaying the two words over and over. A scar had just been carved into my sanity, and a single, terrifying question echoed in the space where my thoughts used to be. What is it? The first light of morning was a dirty gray line under the drawn blinds. I was on the floor, my back pressed against the wall where I'd ended up last night. My neck was stiff. My head throbbed with a dull, familiar ache that had nothing to do with cheap whiskey, and everything to do with a black rectangle sitting on the sofa cushion across the room. The phone. Its screen was dark. It looked harmless. Just a piece of plastic and glass. A lie. My mouth was dry. I pushed myself up, my joints protesting, and moved toward the kitchen. I didn't look at the sofa. I kept my eyes on the scuffed laminate floor, on the peeling paint at the base of the walls. In the kitchen I twisted the tap. Water hammered into the sink. I bent down and drank straight from the faucet, the cold, chlorinated water doing little to wash away the memory of his voice. My voice. It started. What the hell was it? A prank. A very elaborate, very cruel prank. That had to be it. Someone spoofed my number. Someone hacked my phone, my smart speaker. Some bored kid with too much time and technical skill. It was the only explanation that didn't involve me completely losing my mind. I held onto that thought like a man gripping a ledge. It was a small ledge, and the drop was a long way down. I had to get to work. Work was routine. Work was normal. Work meant leaving this box of a room, leaving the phone behind. I went back into the main room and stripped off yesterday's t-shirt. It smelled sour. I pulled on a clean shirt. Jeans. The small mundane actions were a comfort. Putting on socks. Tying my shoes. This is real. This is what people do. From the apartment next door, through the thin walls, came the tinny sound of a television. A news anchor's voice, chipper and detached. Concerns are growing over the city's aging public transit fleet. A report issued last month highlighted significant maintenance backlogs, particularly for the Model 14 buses, with several officials warning that a major failure is not a matter of quote, 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 quote. I paused, one arm in my jacket sleeve. Everything's falling apart in this goddamn city, I muttered, the words a low rasp in my throat. I shook my head and finished putting on my jacket. It was just noise. The city was always full of noise, full of warnings about things that might happen, could happen, probably wouldn't happen. You could drive yourself crazy listening to all of it. I needed my wallet. My keys. They were on the coffee table, right next to the sofa. Right next to the phone. I took a breath and walked over. I snatched the wallet and keys. My fingers brushing the cool glass of the screen. It vibrated. A single, sharp buzz against my knuckles. I yanked my hand back as if I'd been burned. I stared at it. The screen lit up. Not a call this time. A message. A preview of the text was stark against the black background. The sender was my own name. Cole. My heart began a low, heavy drum against my ribs. I had to read it. I had to know. My thumb, shaking slightly, tapped the notification. The message opened. It was just a few words, typed in clean, cold letters. Don't take bus number 14 at 8:15. Don't. I looked at the digital clock at the top of the screen. 8:10 a.m. The bus stop was at the end of the block. I took the number 14 every single morning. A chill, completely separate from the morning air, spread from the base of my spine and out to my fingertips. The news report. The timing. It was too much. A coincidence. A horrifying, sickening coincidence. Bullshit, I whispered. I forced a laugh, but it came out as a strangled puff of air. It was a prank. The prankster heard the news report, just like I did. They knew my routine. That had to be it. Someone was watching me. The thought was meant to be rational, but it offered no comfort. I stood there, frozen, the phone in my hand, the message glowing. The seconds ticked by. 8:11. My mind was a war zone. One side screamed at me to throw the phone against the wall, walk out the door, and get on the bus just to prove this was all nothing. The other side, a quieter, colder voice, remembered the sound of my own panic through the speaker. It remembered the sound of the closet door creaking open when nothing had moved. The choice was simple. Go, or don't go. A small blue light began to pulse in the corner of the room. On the dusty bookshelf, next to a stack of old paperbacks, sat the cheap smart speaker I'd gotten for free with some online order. I never used it. It was just part of the clutter. The light pulsed, once, twice. Then a voice spoke from it, a placid, synthetic female voice that cut through the silence of the room. As requested, playing live audio from the intersection of 7th and Elm. My blood ran cold. I hadn't said a word. From the speaker, a new set of sounds spilled into my apartment. It was the sound of the street, but amplified, raw. The distant rumble of traffic. The hiss of air brakes. A car horn blared, long and angry. Then, underneath it all, a new sound began to build. A high-pitched, mechanical whine. An engine screaming past its limits. It was the sound of metal under stress. Of something big and heavy and powerful, going terribly, terribly wrong. I recognized the intersection. It was where the bus stop was. A woman's voice shouted something indistinct. A man yelled, "Hey, watch out!" The engine noise grew louder, closer. A furious roar that filled my small room. I could hear it. I could hear it all. The future, or the present somewhere else, was being piped into my apartment like a radio broadcast from hell. It wasn't a warning anymore. It was a live performance. I moved. My feet slapped against the laminate floor. I didn't think, I just ran. 2 strides, and I was at the window, my hands fumbling with the cheap plastic blinds, pulling them apart. My apartment faced the street. My window looked right down on the corner of 7th and Elm. It was happening. The bus, the number 14 painted on its side in faded blue, was already off the road. It wasn't slowing down. It was accelerating. It mounted the curb with a violent lurch, its big tires exploding as they hit the concrete edge. People on the sidewalk scattered. A frantic, silent movie from 7 floors up. I saw a man drop a briefcase, its contents spilling across the pavement. I saw a woman pull a child back, just as the massive metal box careened past. The bus swerved, its front end swinging wildly. It was aimed directly at the thick steel light pole on the corner. The same pole I leaned against every single morning. The sound from the speaker in my room synced perfectly with the scene outside my window. The final, deafening roar of the engine. The high-pitched scream of twisting metal. The world tore open. The impact was a physical blow, a shockwave I felt in the soles of my feet and the glass of the window pane. The bus wrapped itself around the pole like it was made of foil. The front of the vehicle collapsed inward, a brutal accordion of glass and steel. For a half-second, there was a strange silence. The engine died. The screaming stopped. Then it exploded. A bloom of orange and black erupted from the bus's engine compartment. The sound hit me a moment later, a deep, concussive whump that rattled the building. The windows of the storefront across the street shattered, raining glass onto the chaos below. Black smoke boiled into the morning sky. The sounds started again. The real sounds, this time. Sirens, beginning to wail in the distance. People screaming. The crackle of fire. I stood there, gripping the blinds, my knuckles white. My breath was gone. My mind was a white-hot blank. I saw it. It was real. It happened. It happened exactly as I was told it would. The prank wasn't a prank. The coincidence wasn't a coincidence. I was listening to it happen on a speaker, and I was watching it happen through my window. The 2 realities had merged, and the result was burning on the street below. My hand was still clutching my phone. It felt hot, slick with sweat. It vibrated again. A gentle buzz against my palm. So quiet, so calm after the violence outside. I couldn't look. I didn't want to look. But I had to. It was like picking at a wound. You know it will hurt, but you can't stop. I lowered my eyes from the burning wreckage and looked at the screen. A new message. From my own number. It wasn't text this time. It was a video. A small thumbnail showed the bus, the fire, the smoke. My thumb moved on its own, pressing play. The video filled the screen. The quality was perfect. The sound was clear. It was a recording of the crash. The screech of tires. The horrifying impact. The eruption of fire. But it was the angle that made the air leave my lungs. It was filmed from above, looking down at the corner of 7th and Elm. It was filmed through a window, the edge of the cheap, beige window frame visible on the left side of the screen. It was filmed from my window. It was the exact view I had just witnessed with my own eyes. I stared, my mind refusing to understand what I was seeing. A recording of the event. A morbid souvenir. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was below the video player. In small, gray text was the message information. Details I didn't want to see but couldn't look away from. Sent. 8:14 a.m. Received. 8:16 a.m. My eyes flicked to the clock at the top of my phone screen. It was 8:17 a.m. now. The video had been sent to me 1 minute before the crash happened. It hadn't just predicted it. It hadn't just warned me. It had recorded it before it happened. It had watched me, standing here at this window, watching the street. It was watching me now. I dropped the phone. It hit the floor with a flat, plastic slap. I backed away from the window, away from the phone, my eyes wide, staring at the empty space in the air where the video had played. The sirens were getting louder, closer, but they sounded a million miles away. The only thing in the world that was real was the timestamp. 8:14 a.m. A ghost in the machine wasn't just talking to me anymore. It was holding the camera. The sirens faded, leaving a silence in the room that felt heavier than the noise. The phone lay on the floor, screen dark, a slab of black glass on the scuffed wood laminate. I backed away from it, one step at a time until my shoulders hit the wall. The burning wreckage on the street below was no longer my concern. The fire, the screams, the chaos, it was all outside. The real problem was in here with me. I looked from the phone to the front door. I moved toward it, my steps measured, deliberate. My hand closed around the deadbolt. It was cold. I turned it. The bolt slid home with a heavy, final thunk. A second lock. A chain. I slid it across its track. The small metallic rattle was the only sound. Locked in. Or locked out. I wasn't sure which. I couldn't leave it on the floor. I walked back and bent down, my fingers hesitating an inch above the screen before I snatched it up. My thumb moved on its own, navigating to the video. I had to see it again. The play icon. I pressed it. The scene replayed. The bus, seen from above. The lurch. The horrifying yet silent swerve as it mounted the curb. The impact. A silent flower of twisted metal. Then the explosion. The sound roaring through the phone's small speakers. A perfect, tinny echo of the blast that had vibrated through my feet moments ago. On the left side of the screen, the beige-painted edge of my own window frame. Sent, 8:14 a.m. My chest tightened. It wasn't a memory of the bus crash. It was another memory. One I spent every waking hour trying to bury. A different night. Different, broken glass. Headlights slicing through rain. The wet, percussive sound of a collision. I didn't see a face, I never did. Just the shape. The shape of a body hitting the hood of my car. I didn't stop, I just drove. The thought was a physical thing. A shard of ice lodging itself behind my ribs. This is your payment. It's finally here. I slammed the phone face down on the kitchen counter and went to the sink. My throat was sandpaper. My hands shook as I reached for the tap. Water. I just needed water. The phone rang. The sound tore through the quiet apartment. It was a shrill, digital shriek that made me jerk my hand back from the faucet. I stared at the device on the counter, vibrating, its screen lit up with my own name. I swiped to answer, my thumb leaving a sweaty smear on the glass. I put it on speaker. "Don't do it!" The voice was mine, but it was shredded with panic. It was the same voice from the first call. Desperate. Afraid. "Cole, don't drink the water. For God's sake, don't drink the water from the tap. It's poisoned." I froze. My gaze fixed on the stream of clear water pouring into the metal basin. It looked normal. It smelled normal. "There's E. coli in it." A main line broke. "They haven't announced it yet." "Don't drink it. There's a bottle in the fridge. Drink that one. Now. Do it now." The voice was breathless, gasping. The call ended. Silence returned. A drop of water fell from the faucet. Tap. Then, another. Tap. I looked at the flowing water. Then at the refrigerator. It was a game. This was another part of the game. First, the bus. Now this. A way to make me dance. A way to make me afraid of my own shadow. My own home. My hand moved back toward the tap. I would call the bluff. I would drink the water, and nothing would happen. But my feet didn't move. My hand stopped. The video of the crash played in my head. The timestamp. 8:14 a.m. It hadn't been a bluff. I turned from the sink and walked to the refrigerator. My hand trembled on the handle. I pulled it open. The small light inside flickered on, illuminating the near-empty shelves. A carton of milk, half a block of cheese, and a single unopened bottle of spring water. It was beaded with condensation, perfectly chilled. I didn't buy it. I never bought bottled water. I stared at it, at the label with its picture of a pristine mountain peak. Someone had been here. Someone had come into my apartment, opened my refrigerator, and placed this bottle inside. The thought was colder than the air spilling from the open door. The deadbolt on my door suddenly felt useless. My thirst was a physical command. I grabbed the bottle. The plastic was cold and firm. I twisted the cap. The seal broke with a sharp crack. I lifted it to my lips and drank. I drained half the bottle in a series of long, desperate swallows. The water was clean and cold, and it did nothing to calm the shaking in my hands. I leaned against the counter, breathing heavily. The plastic bottle crushed slightly in my grip. The television in the living area clicked on. I whipped my head around. The screen, dark a moment ago, now glowed with the bright, clean colors of a news studio. It was a smart TV. I knew it could be activated remotely, but I had never seen it happen on its own. A news anchor was speaking, her voice professionally calm. But it was the red banner scrolling across the bottom of the screen that held my attention. Public health alert. E. coli contamination detected in downtown municipal water supply. Residents in zip codes 90012, 90017 advised to boil water. Do not drink from tap. I read the words twice, 3 times. My zip code was 90,015. The bottle of water in my hand felt impossibly heavy. Relief washed over me, a sickening, terrifying wave of it. It was real. It had saved me. Again. This wasn't a punishment. This was salvation. The thought was 100 times more frightening than any threat. Why? Why me? Why was this thing, this voice, this entity, keeping me alive? I set the bottle down on the counter. My legs felt weak. I was a puppet. And my string puller had just saved me from drinking poison. My gratitude was choked by a primal dread. It was sparing me for a reason. As if on cue, the phone rang again. Same caller ID. My name, I answered, my hand moving automatically. Hello? My own voice was a whisper. This time, the voice on the other end wasn't panicked. It was calm. Measured. Eerily serene. It was still my voice, but it was a version of me that had never known fear. You see, Cole, I'm looking out for you. I said nothing. I just listened. Now I need you to do something for me. Go to the window, the one that looks down into the back alley. I hesitated. My apartment was on the 7th floor. The alley was a grimy, trash-strewn canyon between my building and the one next to it. Go on, the voice urged, patient. Just look. My feet moved before my mind agreed. I walked out of the kitchen, past the couch, to the side window. I peered through the grimy glass. 7 stories down, the alley was empty save for a row of overflowing dumpsters and scattered cardboard boxes. A rat skittered from one shadow to another. There's nothing here, I said. I know, the voice replied, a hint of something that might have been amusement in its tone. I just wanted you to be looking away. Now turn around. I turned. Look at the television, the voice commanded. I looked. The news report was still playing. The anchor's mouth moved, but I couldn't hear her. It's watching you, Cole. The TV. It has a camera. That's how it knows. That's how they know. You have to destroy it. You have to do it now. The toolbox. It was in the bottom of the hall closet. A cheap set I bought years ago. There was a hammer inside. A claw hammer with a red rubber grip. Are you listening, Cole? The voice said, still unnervingly calm. It's the only way to be safe. Get the hammer. I was moving again. My body was no longer my own. It belonged to the voice in the phone. I opened the closet, pulled out the plastic toolbox. The latches snapped open. The hammer was there, nestled in its plastic cutout. I lifted it. The weight felt good in my hand. Solid. Real. I walked back into the living room, hammer in one hand, phone in the other. I stood in front of the television. The anchor smiled. They're watching you through her eyes, the voice whispered in my ear. Smash it. I believed it. In that moment, with the memory of the bus and the taste of clean water still in my mouth, I believed it completely. It had saved my life twice. This was the price. This was the next step. An act of faith. I raised the hammer. The muscles in my shoulder and back coiled. For a second, a small, rational part of my brain screamed that this was insane. But the voice was louder. The voice was my savior. I swung. The hammer connected with the center of the screen. The sound was not a simple crash. It was an implosion. A violent, granular burst like a bag of ice and sand rupturing all at once. The screen didn't just crack. It vaporized into a million tiny cubes of safety glass that sprayed outward. A spiderweb of deeper fractures shot across the remaining black surface. A shower of sparks erupted from the ruined circuitry behind the screen, and the smell of hot plastic and ozone filled the air. The anchor's face was gone, replaced by a dead, smoking crater. I stood there, breathing hard, my arm tingling from the impact. The hammer hung loosely in my grip. It was done. I was safe. The phone in my other hand buzzed. A new notification. It wasn't a call, it was a text message. From myself. I lifted the phone, my heart starting a slow, heavy beat. The message was 3 words. 3 simple words in cold, black text. You were fooled. As I read the words, a new sound reached me. Not from the phone, not from the street outside, but from the hallway beyond my front door. It was shouting. A man's voice, panicked. A woman yelling. The words were muffled by my door, but I could make them out. The whole floor is flooding. A main water pipe burst. Someone called a super. It's everywhere. My blood went cold. A burst water pipe. Not a contamination, just a plumbing failure. I scrambled for the small, battery-powered radio I kept on a bookshelf for emergencies. I twisted the dial. The static gave way to a pop song, then a car commercial, then the weather. No public health alert, no mention of E. coli. It had lied. It hadn't saved me from poison. It had known the pipe was going to burst and that the water would be shut off. It had made me believe in a danger that wasn't there, just to gain my trust, just to make me do this. I stared at the ruined television. A thin wisp of smoke curled up from the shattered screen. I stared at the hammer in my hand. I stared at the phone. It hadn't saved me. It had played me. It wasn't a guardian angel. It was just a cat. And I was the mouse. And it was teaching me a new lesson. The only thing more dangerous than its threats were its promises of safety. The smell of burnt plastic and ozone was the only thing that felt real. It clung to the back of my throat, a physical reminder of my own stupidity. I looked from the smoking hole in the television to the hammer in my hand. Its weight was an accusation. The text message on my phone's screen glowed. You were fooled. My legs moved. I walked back to the kitchen, the hammer still hanging from my fist. The bottle of water sat on the counter, half empty. Salvation. A lie. It was a tool, just like the video of the bus crash. It wasn't about saving me, it was about conditioning me. Training me. Like a dog. A bell rings, the dog salivates. My phone rings, I do what it says. I placed the hammer on the counter with a heavy clink. My gaze swept across the apartment, a new understanding dawning. This place wasn't my home. It was a cage, and the bars were made of wires and signals. I started with the kitchen. The coffee maker, with its little glowing clock. I yanked the plug from the wall. The prongs made a small, scraping sound against the socket's contacts. The clock went dark. The microwave. Its green digital display blinked out of existence. I went into the living room. A floor lamp. I pulled its cord. The hum of the small transformer inside it ceased. My laptop, sleeping on the coffee table. I didn't just unplug its charger. I held the power button down until the machine clicked off, then I shut the lid. The small pinprick of light from its webcam felt like an eye. I went to the hall closet, found the roll of black duct tape I'd bought for a leaky pipe ages ago. The sound of the tape ripping off the roll was loud in the new quiet. I tore a small square and pressed it firmly over the laptop's camera lens. A small, black patch of ignorance. The phone. It was still on the counter, screen lit. It was the source. The master key. But I couldn't destroy it. It was the only way the warnings came. It was poison and antidote all in one. I couldn't smash it. But I could blind it. I tore another piece of tape and pressed it over the front-facing camera. Then I flipped it over, and did the same to the lens on the back. My own name on the screen was still visible, a constant taunt. I turned the phone face down. I stood in the center of the room, listening. The building was no longer silent. The absence of the refrigerator's low thrum was a sound in itself. I could hear the creak of floorboards from the apartment above. The distant groan of the elevator in its shaft. My own breathing. Too fast. Too shallow. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I had cut the wires, but I knew it wasn't enough. It had shown me a video from my own window. It had put a bottle of water in my fridge. It could get in. A pressure built in my bladder. A stupid, mundane human need. The bathroom. The thought of the small, enclosed space made my skin crawl. There were no electronics in there, but there was a window that opened onto a narrow air shaft, and there was the mirror. I walked toward it, my bare feet cold on the wood laminate. Each step was a conscious choice. I put my hand on the bathroom doorknob. It was cold. I turned it and pushed the door open. The light was off. The only illumination came from the living room behind me, casting long shadows. I took one step inside. My eyes went to the mirror above the sink. A large, simple plate of glass glued to the wall. It reflected the hallway, a dark rectangle of doorway against the gloom. Something moved. At the very edge of the reflection, a flicker of shadow, quick as a blink. I froze, my hand still on the doorknob. My breath hitched. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them again. I stared at the spot. Nothing. Just the reflection of the doorframe. My knuckles were white, where I gripped the knob. You haven't slept. It's the stress. It's a trick of the light. I repeated the words in my head, a desperate mantra. I forced my hand to release the knob. I took another step into the room, keeping my eyes on the mirror. My reflection appeared, a dark silhouette against the brighter space behind me. It looked normal. It was me. I needed to turn the light on. The switch was next to the door. My hand felt heavy as I reached for it. I didn't want to see what was in here more clearly, but I didn't want to be in the dark either. I flipped the switch. The single bulb overhead flickered to life with an audible buzz, flooding the small room in stark, humming light. I blinked against the sudden brightness. The bathroom was just a bathroom. White tile, a cheap shower curtain with a mildew stain at the bottom, a sink. Everything was exactly as it should be. The reflection in the mirror was just me. A man with wild eyes, pale skin, and a sheen of sweat on his forehead. I looked like I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. I ran my hands through my hair, trying to calm down. The reflection did the same. I took a deep, shuddering breath. The reflection's chest rose and fell in perfect sync. I leaned forward, gripping the edges of the porcelain sink. The cool, smooth ceramic was a comfort. I was here. I was real. I turned on the tap. Cold water rushed out. I cupped my hands and splashed my face. Once. Twice. The shock of the cold was a slap. A dose of reality. The water dripped from my chin into the basin. I kept my head down for a long moment, just breathing, listening to the water drumming against the porcelain. I am Cole. I am in my apartment. I am losing my grip, but I am still here. I straightened up, raising my head to look at myself one more time. My head came up, my eyes opened. In the mirror, my reflection remained bent over the sink. Time stopped. The sound of the running water seemed to fade into a distant roar. My heart didn't beat. My lungs didn't draw air. I was looking at the back of my own head in the mirror, an impossible geometry of sight. It was still stooped over, its hands braced on the edge of the sink, just as mine had been a second ago. I could see the dark, wet hair, the curve of its shoulders under the gray t-shirt. It wasn't moving. I took a step back. My bare heel landed on a grout line in the tile floor, the slight difference in texture, a jolt to my system. I was real. I had moved. But the figure in the mirror had not. It remained perfectly still, a statue of me, frozen in the act of washing its face. The water from the real faucet was still running, but in the mirror world, the basin was dry. My mind scrambled for an explanation. A hallucination. A complex trick of the light and the water on my eyes. It had to be. I blinked hard, trying to clear my vision, trying to force the world to snap back into place. Nothing changed. The other me was still there, head bowed. Then, its shoulders began to shake. A slow, silent tremor. It wasn't shivering. It wasn't crying. It was a rhythmic, silent shaking. A silent laugh. It was laughing at the back of its own neck, laughing down into the sink. I backed away another step, my shoulders bumping into the door. I fumbled behind me for the knob, a desperate, animal need to flee screaming through my veins. My fingers found nothing but the flat, smooth wood of the door. Slowly, deliberately, the figure in the mirror raised its head. It was my face. Every detail was mine. The shape of the jaw, the small scar over my right eyebrow. But the expression was a perversion. The eyes were not my eyes. They were wide, unblinking pits of darkness, reflecting nothing. And the mouth. The mouth was stretched into a smile that was impossibly wide, pulling the skin of the cheeks taut in a way that skin shouldn't stretch. It was a predator's smile, a smile of pure, vicious amusement. It looked at me, not as a reflection but as a man looking through a window. It saw me. The thing wearing my face raised its right hand, not its left hand, which would have been the mirror image of my own right. Its right hand. It brought its index finger up, crooked the knuckle and pressed it against the surface of the mirror from its side. TOC. The sound was small, dry, and hideously clear. The sound of a knuckle rapping on glass. It came from the mirror itself. TOC. It knocked again, a little harder. The smile widened, a split in the mask of my face. Its dark eyes never left mine. They were full of an ancient, knowing cruelty. I made a sound, a choked gasp, that was half word, half whimper. My brain broke. The rules no longer applied. This wasn't a trick, this wasn't in my head. This was real, this was happening. My eyes darted around the room, frantic, searching for a weapon, for anything. On the small shelf above the toilet was a glass bottle of cologne my mother had given me for Christmas 2 years ago. Heavy glass. Solid. I didn't think. I lunged. I snatched the bottle from the shelf, my fingers closing around its square shape. The thing in the mirror watched me move, its smile fixed, its hand still pressed against the glass. It knew what I was going to do. It wanted me to. I pivoted, raw panic giving me strength. I threw the bottle with all my might. It flew across the small room and hit the mirror dead center, right where the horrifying face was. The impact was not a clean shatter. It was a wet, violent crunch. The mirror didn't just crack. It seemed to dissolve at the point of impact, exploding into a web of 1,000 fractures. A shower of tiny glass diamonds rained down into the sink and onto the floor, tinkling like ice. Larger shards, sharp and jagged, fell away from the wall and clattered onto the tile. The bottle itself dropped into the sink with a heavy splash, cologne pouring out, its sharp clean scent a violation in the ruined room. I stood panting, my chest heaving. The after-image of the impact burned into my retinas. It was gone. I had destroyed it. I had smashed the window. But it wasn't gone. A large, triangular piece of mirror, perhaps a foot high, remained stuck to the wall, held in place by the adhesive. And on its fractured surface, the face was still there. It wasn't distorted by the cracks. It was perfectly clear. The smile was even wider now, a grotesque crescent that threatened to tear the face in two. It stared at me from the ruin, victorious. I felt a sharp sting on my left cheek. I reached up, my fingers trembling. I touched the spot. It was wet. I pulled my hand back and looked. My fingertips were smeared with red, a thin line of blood, bright and vivid against my pale skin. I stared at my fingers, then back at the shattered mirror. There, on the floor amidst the glittering debris, was a small, wicked-looking shard of glass. It must have flown out and cut me, a simple, physical explanation. But as I looked at my own bleeding face in the remaining piece of the mirror, the smiling thing raised a hand to its own cheek. It touched the exact same spot. It held its fingers up, showing them to me. They were clean. There was no cut on its face. The smile never wavered. Then, slowly, deliberately, a single perfect drop of my blood welled up on my skin, grew heavy, and traced a path down my cheek. A single warm tear I did not shed. The single drop of blood felt as hot as a spark against my skin. It traced a line down my cheek, a path I could feel with a precision that was impossible. My breath came in ragged bursts. The sharp scent of alcohol and cheap fragrance from the shattered cologne bottle was thick in the air. My eyes were fixed on the shard of mirror still stuck to the wall. The smiling face in the glass, my face, watched the drop of blood roll down my real cheek. It was a spectator, an audience. I stumbled back, my bare feet crunching on the tiny, sharp jewels of glass covering the tile. A sharp pain shot up from the sole of my right foot. I didn't look down. I couldn't look away from the shard. The face in it didn't move. Its smile was a fixed, painted thing on a broken mask. This room was a box. The apartment was a bigger box. I was going to die in here. The thought was not a panic, but a flat, cold fact. The prison I had built for myself out of guilt had become a literal cage, and something else was the warden. No. The word was a silent shape in my mouth. I had to get out. Prison for a car accident I ran from years ago was a known quantity. It had walls and rules and other people. It was a sane world. This place was not. My legs moved, clumsy and uncoordinated. I lurched out of the bathroom, leaving a small, bloody footprint on the white tile. My eyes locked on the front door. Keys. I needed my keys. They were in the bowl by the door. I snatched them, the metal jangling with a sound that was deafeningly loud. My hand clumsy, shaking. I didn't bother with shoes. I didn't bother with my wallet. I fumbled with the locks on the door. One deadbolt. A chain. Each metallic slide and click was a gunshot in the humming silence of the unplugged apartment. The door swung open. The air from the hallway hit me. It was stale and smelled of cooking from another apartment, but it was outside air. I ran. I didn't wait for the elevator. I threw myself at the door to the stairwell. The heavy fire door slammed shut behind me, the sound echoing in the concrete shaft. My bare feet pounded down the steps, the rough concrete scraping my skin, but the pain was a distant thing, a static from another room. Down and down. 2 floors. 3. I burst out into the lobby. A woman waiting for the elevator looked at me, her eyes wide. A man with wild eyes, no shoes, a bloody cheek and a bloody foot. I didn't slow down. I pushed the polished brass bar of the main entrance. Cold night air hit my face. It was real. The rumble of traffic 2 blocks over, the distant wail of a siren, the smell of damp pavement. I was on the sidewalk. I was out. Freedom was a physical shock. I ran, turning left, toward the main avenue. The police station was 6 blocks that way. My chest burned. My feet were on fire. The rough surface of the sidewalk was a bed of nails. I didn't care. I kept going. I reached the corner and stopped, leaning against a brick wall to catch my breath. My lungs felt raw. I needed to think for a second. Get my bearings. My hand went to my pocket out of habit. My fingers brushed against the smooth, hard shape of my phone, the phone I had unplugged. The phone whose battery had been dying for hours yesterday. I hadn't plugged it in. The screen was dark. I had taped over its cameras. It was a useless brick. The screen lit up. I stared down at it, a white light in the palm of my hand. There was no notification sound, no vibration. It just came to life. The battery icon was full, green. An image resolved on the screen. It wasn't a text message. It wasn't a website. It was just a picture, filling the display. It was a photograph of a newspaper clipping, yellowed, creased paper. The font was from an old press. I squinted, my breath catching in my throat. I could make out the headline. Backquote, local woman killed in midnight hit and run. Backquote. I knew the date below the headline. I knew it like my own birthday. My eyes scanned the text, the words blurring. They didn't need to be clear. My gaze fell on the subheadline, to the name of the victim, printed in stark, black letters. Sarah Miller. The name hit me like a physical blow. A ghost I had lived with for 5 years. A name I repeated to myself in the dark. Now it was here, on a screen, in my hand. Proof. The thing tormenting me knew. It knew everything. It had always known. The image vanished. The screen reverted to my home screen. Then it flickered, and my own number appeared. Backquote. Incoming call. Backquote. My thumb hovered over the green icon. Answering was madness. Not answering felt worse. With a hand that shook so badly I could barely control it, I pressed the screen. I lifted the phone to my ear. The cold glass felt like ice against my bleeding cheek. There was no static, just the sound of breathing. My own breathing, but steady, calm. Then a voice spoke. It was my voice. But it wasn't. It was hollowed out, empty of warmth, empty of fear. It was the voice of a machine that had learned to perfectly mimic my vocal cords. You go to the police, the voice said, flat and calm. And an email is sent. It contains that article. It contains a map to where you buried her car keys. It contains a full, detailed confession, signed with a perfect digital forgery of your signature. Are you feeling lucky, killer? The word hung in the air between the phone and my ear. Killer. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact. A label. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. My grip on the phone tightened. The brick wall at my back was the only thing holding me up. The sounds of the city, the horns, the distant siren, they were all gone. There was only the voice in my ear. My voice. I hung up. I jammed the phone back into my pocket. My legs felt weak, my feet numb. The police station was no longer a sanctuary, it was just another part of the trap. Every direction was a wall. I looked up and down the street, a wild animal caught in the open. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows. Every passing car was a threat. Every person walking on the far sidewalk was an observer. Then I saw it. Halfway down the next block, crawling along the curb, a police car. Its headlights cut through the dark. A slow, steady patrol. A lifeline. The sight of it, real and solid, was a jolt to my system. The voice on the phone was a phantom. The sniper was a phantom. The cop was real. He could help me. He had a gun. He had a radio. He was salvation. All I had to do was wave. Step into the street. Yell. My arms started to lift. My mouth opened to shout. My pocket buzzed. A hard, insistent vibration against my leg. I flinched, my hand dropping. I pulled the phone out again. I didn't want to look, but I had to. The screen was already on. It was a video. A live stream. The connection icon glowed in the corner. The footage was shaky, handheld. It was looking down from a high place. A rooftop. I could see the gravel-covered surface of a roof, a ventilation duct. Then the view panned. I saw the street below, my street. I saw the back of my own head, my gray t-shirt, standing against the brick wall. It was filming me. Right now. The camera tilted up slightly. A pair of black boots came into view. Then black pants. A black jacket. The camera moved up to show a figure, completely clad in black, standing near the ledge of the building across the street from me. In his hands he held a rifle. It wasn't a hunting rifle. It was long, black, and fitted with a large scope. As I watched the figure raise the rifle, bracing it against his shoulder, the video feed changed. It switched to the view through the scope. A black circle, crosshairs in the middle. The crosshairs swept across the street, jerky and fast. They passed over me. Then they moved down the block, settling on the police car. The image magnified. I could see the officer in the driver's seat. He was leaning forward, adjusting his radio. The crosshairs rested perfectly on the back of his head. My phone, held in my trembling hand, became a window into an execution. A whisper came from the phone's speaker. The same dead, empty voice. My voice. Choose Cole. The word was quiet, almost gentle. Your life, or his. I stood frozen. My blood turned to ice. My feet were cemented to the pavement. The police car. The officer inside, unaware, safe for now. He was maybe 30 years old. He had a family. He was just doing his job. All I had to do was nothing. Just stand here, let him drive away. If I yelled, if I waved, if I drew his attention, the man on the roof would pull the trigger. The voice on the phone promised it with its simple, terrible choice. My arm, the one I had started to raise, felt like it was made of lead. It stayed pinned to my side. My throat was closed. A scream was trapped in my chest, a physical object I couldn't force out. The police car's brake lights went off. It pulled away from the curb smoothly. It drove past the spot where I stood, its tires hissing on the wet asphalt. I could have reached out and touched it. The officer inside didn't even glance my way. He drove to the end of the block, his turn signal blinked, and he disappeared around the corner. He was gone. He was safe. The video feed on my phone cut to black. The screen went dark. I was alone on the sidewalk. I had made my choice. I had chosen to be silent. I had let him go. I had saved him by condemning myself. A new kind of cold seeped into me, a cold that had nothing to do with the night air. It was the chill of complicity. I wasn't just the mouse anymore. I had just helped the cat corner another piece of prey, just by staying out of the way. I had obeyed. I had participated. The cut on my cheek stung. The gash on my foot throbbed. They were marks. Scars. A brand. I wasn't just the victim of the game. I was now a player. And I had just lost my first move. I did not walk back. I don't remember the journey. One moment I was on a street corner, the police car a fading pair of red lights. The next, my hand was on the cold brass knob of my apartment door. My key was already in the lock. I twisted it. The sound of the bolt sliding home was a final, heavy punctuation mark. A period at the end of a sentence about freedom. My bare right foot left a smeared, brownish-red track on the cheap laminate floor as I entered. I closed the door behind me and slid the chain across. The metal whispered into place. I was back in the box. The air was the same, thick with the ghost of shattered cologne and something else, something metallic and sharp. The smell of my own fear. My body moved without instruction. I made it 3 steps into the main room before my legs gave out. I did not fall so much as fold, my knees hitting the floor with a dull thud that sent a jolt up my spine. I curled onto my side, my cheek pressed against the dusty surface. The floor was cool. It drew the heat from my skin. I could see the shards of glass from the bathroom glittering under the ambient light from the window. Little, unblinking eyes. I lay there. I didn't think about the man on the roof. I didn't think about the cop who drove away. I didn't think about Sarah Miller. Those were thoughts. And thoughts were a luxury from a world that no longer existed. My world now consisted of the floor, the air in my lungs, the steady, heavy beat of my own heart in my ears. I was a piece of meat on a hook, waiting. The game had rules I couldn't comprehend, played by a thing I couldn't see, for stakes I couldn't afford. I had obeyed. I had chosen. I had been made into an accomplice. The first lesson was over. Now I waited for the next. The butcher had put down his knife for a moment, and all I could do was wait for him to pick it up again. The minutes bled into an hour, then another. The only sound was the building itself, the groan of pipes in the walls, the distant hum of the city filtered through glass and brick. I did not move. My muscles began to ache. The cut on my foot throbbed in time with my pulse, a dull, rhythmic pain. The blood on my cheek grew tight and flaky as it dried. My phone lay on the floor a few feet away, its screen a black mirror reflecting the faint light from the street. It was silent. Dead. This quiet was different from the silence before. It wasn't an absence of sound. It was heavy. It was a weight. The pressure in the air before a storm breaks. The hunter does not make noise when it watches its cornered prey. It just waits for the animal to exhaust itself, for the hope to drain away. My eyes kept flicking to the phone, an involuntary twitch. My body was anticipating the shock. I started to crave it. The vibration, the ringtone, any signal to prove that this thing, this entity was still there. The alternative, that it had all been a hallucination, a complete break from reality, was somehow worse. A foe you can hear is better than the one that lives only inside your own skull. Let it be real. Let it call. Just do something. Time stretched. I watched the weak rectangle of light from the window crawl across the floor. 2 hours. Maybe 3. My thirst became a physical presence, a dryness that coated my tongue and throat. My body was a machine running out of fuel, but I could not command it to stand. I was pinned to the floor by the sheer gravity of the waiting. Then, a sound. It was not the ring of a call. It was a soft, electronic chime, the sound of a new email. It was loud in the dead air of the room. My head snapped up, my eyes locked on the phone. The screen was alive, a brilliant white rectangle in the gloom. I crawled. The movement was stiff, clumsy. My knees scraped against the floor. I ignored the small pieces of glass, grinding them into the wood beneath me. My hand, shaking, reached out and picked up the device. The screen was cool. It showed one new message. Sender. Address blocked. Subject. Playground. My finger hovered over the message. Playground. A schoolyard. A park. A place for games. I pressed the screen. The body of the email was not text. It was a solid, dense block of code. Lines and lines of green and black symbols, scrolling down the screen. Backquote. 011-01001. Backquote. Backquote. Hash A. 83232. Backquote. Backquote proc. Underscore listen underscore all. Backquote. Backquote. Slash. Slash sys. Dot core. Dot audio. Dot tap. Backquote. It meant nothing to me. It was the language of the machine, of the thing that was talking to me. It was a wall of unintelligible script, a flex of power. It was showing me the plumbing of my own prison. My eyes scanned the meaningless characters. And then, I saw it. Near the bottom, tucked between lines of code, was an attachment. A small icon of a speaker. Backquote audio underscore file underscore 734.mp3 backquote. My heart hammered against my ribs. My thumb moved to it. A part of my brain, a small surviving remnant of my old self, screamed at me not to. Don't listen, don't engage, don't play. But the choice wasn't mine. It never had been. I pressed the icon. The hiss of a low-quality recording filled the air. It wasn't my voice. So I just don't think I can make it. A woman's voice said. It was tired, annoyed. He's been like this all day. Well, can't you get a sitter? A man's voice, impatient. Mark, it's 9 o'clock at night. Who am I gonna call? Look, we can reschedule the dinner. It's not a big deal. It is to me, Janet. It's our anniversary. I know, but the baby has a fever. What do you want me to do? The recording clicked off. Silence returned. I stared at the phone. My blood ran cold. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a warning. It was a conversation. A private, mundane, meaningless argument between two strangers. Mark and Janet. The baby has a fever. He's been like this all day. It was nothing. And that made it everything. The thing tormenting me wasn't just in my phone. It was in their phone. It was in every phone. It was a ghost in the entire machine. My phone rang. The number was my own. This time, I didn't hesitate. I answered. I raised the phone to my ear, the glass still gritty with the drying blood from my cheek. I waited. I heard the sound of my own steady breathing on the other end. The calm monster. You see? The voice said. It was a whisper, but it filled my head. My voice. That dead perfect copy of my voice. There was a new quality to it now. A hint of something that sounded like amusement. I can listen to anyone. Anytime. A pause. I could picture the smile on its stolen face. Your tragedy, Mark and Janet's anniversary, the secrets of 1,000 other people. They're all just different channels to watch. Content for the playground. A knot of ice formed in my stomach. A channel. I was a channel. But yours, the voice continued, its tone dropping into something like a conspiratorial whisper. Yours is the most interesting channel, Cole. Before I could form a word, before I could even hang up, the call ended. And the assault began. My phone buzzed, a hard, violent vibration against my palm. A text message. No words. Just an audio file. Buzz. Another one. Buzz. 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 They came in a flood. A relentless stream of notifications, one after another, stacking up on my screen faster than I could read them. Each one was a new file. _audio_file _912.mp3 _audio_file _1138.mp3 _audio_file _2460.mp3 My thumb, acting on its own, tapped one at random. I swear, I don't know where the money went, Father. A man's voice, raspy and old, confessing in a place that should have been sacred. I jabbed at the screen, stopping it. My thumb hit another. You can't tell Mom, okay? Promise? It was my fault the cat got out. A child's voice, high and panicked, weaving a lie. Another. A woman's raw, broken sobbing. No words, just pure, unfiltered grief. The sound of a heart breaking in real time. Another. The test came back. It's positive. I don't know how to tell him. I dropped the phone. It clattered onto the floor, the screen facing up. But the audio kept playing. The notifications kept coming. A new one popped up, and the phone automatically played the file. If he ever finds out I'm skimming from the accounts, I'm a dead man. The voices overlapped. A confession. A lie. A cry of pain. A whispered secret. They bled into each other. A cacophony of private agony broadcast into the squalor of my apartment. It was a library of human suffering, and the phone was the librarian, throwing books at my head. My great, defining sin. The car accident. The hit and run that had hollowed out my life for 5 years. That secret had felt like a mountain, a unique and towering monument to my own failure. Now, I heard it for what it was. A single grain of sand on an endless beach of misery. I wasn't special. I wasn't being punished for a specific crime. My guilt wasn't the reason. It was just the hook. It was the crack in the wall that let the watcher see in. I was not the star of a tragedy. I was just a passing curiosity. An entertaining show on one of a million channels. And the show had just been renewed for another season. I lay on the floor, my hands over my ears, but it did no good. The sound came from the small speaker of the phone. A tinny, distorted chorus of strangers' heartbreaks. I was just one of them, and in that moment I realized the final, crushing horror. The thing wasn't trying to destroy me, it was just bored. And I was simply the most entertaining thing it had found to watch today. The chorus of stolen agonies died when the phone's battery finally did. The small screen went black. The voices ceased. But they did not leave. They had burrowed into the room, their echoes clinging to the walls like soot. The confession of the old man, the child's lie, the woman's weeping. They were all here with me now. For a long time I did not move. My cheek was stuck to the floor with dried blood. My hands were still cupped over my ears, a useless gesture against a silent assault. I was a curiosity. An entertaining show. The words from my own throat, spoken by that thing, looped in my head. Yours is the most interesting channel, Cole. Something shifted inside me. It wasn't a snap. It was a slow, cold grind, like tectonic plates moving deep beneath the earth. The terror did not vanish. It was still there, a frozen lake in my gut. But something else surfaced through it. A thing with sharp edges. Rage. It was a quiet, clean anger. The anger of a cornered animal that has nothing left to lose. I wasn't a person to it. I was content. A show to be watched. Fine. The show was about to be cancelled. My muscles screamed as I pushed myself up, my knees cracked. I peeled my face off the laminate, the sound wet and tearing. I stood, unsteady, in the center of my trashed room. The cut on my bare foot bit deep as my full weight settled on it, but the pain was a grounding force. It was real. It was mine. I limped to the dead phone. I picked it up. Its blank screen reflected my own face back at me. A pale, grimy mask. I walked to the kitchen, my movements stiff and deliberate. I held the phone over the small, galvanized steel trash can. I let it drop. It landed with a hollow plastic clatter. It wasn't enough. I opened the cupboard under the sink, my hand closing around the heavy iron hammer I kept for small jobs. I brought it out. I raised it high over my head and brought it down into the trash can. The crunch was loud and satisfying. I hit it again. And again. Plastic splintered. Glass cracked. I didn't stop until the phone was a mangled ruin of circuits and shards, buried under coffee grounds and an old milk carton. I was breathing hard, the hammer heavy in my hand. It was a start. My brain began to work with a new, cold clarity. I was getting out. Not just out of the apartment, but out of the city. If this thing was in the network, I would go where the network was thin. I needed a plan. I needed supplies. I moved through the apartment like a machine. I found my worn leather backpack in the closet. I emptied it on the bed, shaking out old receipts and dust. Into it went the essentials. The 3 cans of chili from the back of the pantry. A sleeve of crackers. I filled a water bottle from the tap, the sound of the running water a sudden intrusion in the quiet. I went to the loose floorboard under my bed and pried it up. The small stash of cash was still there. $740. All I had. I stuffed it into the bag. A change of clothes. A map of the state I'd bought years ago and never used. A pocket knife. A small first aid kit. I found a roll of gauze and some tape, and crudely bandaged my foot. The pressure was a dull ache. Good. I zipped the bag shut. It felt heavy. It felt real. A concrete plan. A physical object. A path forward. I slung it over my shoulder. I put on my boots, not bothering with socks. The feel of the rough leather against my skin was another anchor. As I tied the laces, a sound came through the wall. The wall I shared with Mr. Henderson, an old man who watched television at all hours. His TV, usually a low mumble, suddenly blasted. The volume shot up with no warning, loud enough that I could make out every word. It was an old black and white movie, the dialogue full of dramatic, stilted delivery. "There is no escape, my dear boy," a man's voice boomed, rich with theatrical menace. "You cannot run from your own destiny." I froze, one hand on a knotted lace. The sound was so loud it vibrated through the floor. It was a direct response, a sneer, a wink from the audience. As quickly as it had erupted, the volume dropped back to a normal, muffled drone. I finished tying my boot, my fingers fumbling. I stood up. The bag felt heavier now. The street. I had to get to the street. I walked to the door, unlocked it, and slid the chain free. The click of the metal was soft, but it echoed. I stepped into the hallway. The air here was stale, smelling of dust and old cooking. I did not look back. I pulled the door shut behind me. It clicked into its frame. The stairs down to the lobby felt endless. Each step was a conscious effort. The building was quiet. Too quiet. I pushed the heavy glass door and stepped out into the night. The city hit me like a physical blow. The rush of distant traffic, the smell of exhaust and greasy food from the diner down the block, the cool night air on my skin. For a moment it felt like freedom. The world was huge, anonymous. I was just another man with a backpack on a sidewalk. I could disappear. I started walking, heading east, toward the bus station. It was miles away, but I would walk. I would keep to the side streets. I would stay in the shadows. I was 3 blocks from my building when I heard it. A ring. not a cell phone ringtone. A shrill, insistent electronic warble. The sound of a public telephone. I stopped. Across the street, under the sickly yellow glow of a street lamp, was a phone booth. A relic, the kind of thing you barely noticed anymore. And it was ringing. Nobody was near it. The street was empty except for me. It rang again. And again. Piercing the hum of the city. It was for me, I knew it was. The thing wasn't in my phone, it was in the phone. In all of them. My feet moved on their own, carrying me across the cracked asphalt. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. My hand, slick with sweat, reached out and took the cold, heavy plastic receiver. I lifted it to my ear. The ringing stopped. I heard static. A faint hiss. Then the voice. My voice. Calm. Unhurried. You think throwing away a toy is enough, Cole? The words were not a question. They were a statement of fact. My blood turned to ice. I looked around, up at the darkened windows of the buildings, down the empty street. There was no one. I am everywhere. The voice continued, a low whisper in my ear. I am the network. I am the signal. I am you. As it spoke, a city bus pulled up to the corner, its air brakes hissing. I turned my head. Sprawled across the entire side of the bus was a massive advertisement, a smiling family, all staring at their glowing smartphones. And above them, in huge, friendly letters, a single, declarative slogan, always connected. The bus pulled away, spewing a cloud of diesel fumes. The ad was gone, but the image was burned into my vision. The trap wasn't my apartment. The trap was the world. A scream built in my chest, hot and sharp. I let it out into the receiver. What do you want from me? My shout echoed in the quiet street. For a moment, there was only the sound of my own ragged breathing on the line. Then, a soft chuckle. It was the most terrible sound I had ever heard. My voice, my own vocal cords, used to create a sound of pure, detached amusement at my expense. What do I want? The voice said, the humor gone, replaced by a flat instructional tone. I want you to keep playing. The game is more fun when the subject struggles. I stood there, frozen, the plastic of the receiver slick in my palm. So, here's the next round, it said, its voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper, as if sharing a secret. Pay attention, Cole. It's your life on the line. Tonight, at precisely 11 o'clock, the fire alarm system in your building will experience a malfunction. At the same time, an electrical fire will start in the basement. Old wiring. Happens all the time. A pause. I could hear the city sounds through the receiver, as if it was picking up audio from my own location. The fire will spread quickly. The alarms won't sound. Try to survive. The line went dead. The hiss was replaced by the steady, monotonous drone of a dial tone. It was over. The call was over. I stood there, holding the receiver, listening to the dial tone. It was a challenge. A direct, explicit challenge. It wasn't just watching anymore. It was producing. It was setting the stage, giving me the script, and waiting to see how the actor would perform in the final scene. It wanted to watch me run. It wanted to watch me burn. I hung up the phone. The plastic clattered into its cradle. I looked at my watch. 10:17 p.m. I had less than an hour. My first instinct, the animal instinct, was to run. To get as far away from that building as possible. Let it burn. But as I stood there on that empty sidewalk, a new thought, cold and sharp and completely insane, cut through the panic. It had told me where. It had told me when. It wasn't a prophecy from a god. It was a plan. A sequence of events. And if you know the plan, you can break it. My feet started moving. I turned away from the direction of the bus station. I started walking back the way I came. Back toward my apartment. Back toward the fire. For the first time since this started, I had a purpose that wasn't just about survival. It was about defiance. The thing wanted to show, it wanted to see me struggle. I was gonna give it one. I was gonna ruin its ending. I was gonna stop it. The walk back was 3 blocks. The same 3 blocks I had just covered with the illusion of escape at my back. Now, every crack in the pavement looked like a fault line. Every dark alley was a mouth. The city wasn't a place to disappear in. It was the board on which the game was played. My building rose up from the end of the street. A brick-and-mortar tomb. I did not hesitate. I pushed through the heavy glass door into the lobby. The air inside was the same, smelling of dust and disinfectant, but something was different in the way the light from the street cut across the floor. It felt like a stage light. I took the stairs. The elevator was a cage I had no intention of entering. My boots made heavy, deliberate sounds on the concrete steps. The crude bandage on my foot was beginning to soak through, and each step sent a dull, throbbing beat up my leg. It was a good pain. It kept me here. It kept me from floating away. On the third-floor landing, I paused. I looked at the fire extinguisher mounted to the wall. Red canister, black hose, a small pressure gauge. I put my hand on it. It was cool and solid. I checked the small plastic pin holding the handle in place. It was there. The needle on the gauge was in the green zone. It was a real object. A tool. It offered no comfort. I reached my floor. The hallway was a long yellow throat. I walked to my door, 4B. The key slid into the lock. The tumblers clicked. I pushed the door open. The apartment was as I had left it. A ruin. The overturned table. The dented trash can with the corpse of my phone inside. My backpack sat on the bed. A sad, lumpy monument to a plan that had lasted less than 20 minutes. The man on the phone, the man with my voice, was right. A toy had been thrown away. Nothing more. My panic was gone. It had been burned out of me on that street corner, replaced by something cold and brittle. This was no longer about running. It was about standing your ground on a spot that was rigged to collapse. I moved with a new sense of purpose. I went to the kitchen and grabbed the small fire extinguisher from under the sink, the one I'd bought after a grease fire scare years ago. I placed it on the floor by the couch. I took the dish towel, soaked it in the sink, and laid it on the kitchen counter. I moved a stack of old magazines from a wooden end table to the metal top of the radiator. Small things. Useless things. But they were my moves. My choices. Then I looked up. The smoke detector. A small, white plastic circle on the ceiling. The manual had said to test it every month. I never did. Now, it was the most important object in the world. I dragged a kitchen chair under it. The wood scraped against the laminate floor. I stepped onto the chair. It wobbled under my weight. I reached up and pressed the small test button. Nothing happened. The tiny red light that was supposed to flash every minute was dark. My blood ran cold. It had already failed. The plastic cover was supposed to twist off. I put my fingers on it, trying to get a grip. It wouldn't budge. I twisted harder, my knuckles white. A bead of sweat dripped from my forehead and hit the floor. I readjusted, bracing my feet on the rickety chair, and gave it one last hard turn. It gave way with a sharp crack, the plastic groaning in protest. The cover came free in my hand. Inside, the 9-volt battery was nestled in its compartment. But something was wrong. A thin piece of clear plastic, the kind that separates a battery terminal from its contact, was wedged underneath it. It had been installed, but never activated. It was a prop. I pulled the battery out, ripped the plastic tab away, and licked the terminals. Nothing. Not even a faint tingle. The battery was dead. It had always been dead. He hadn't disabled the alarm. He had just made sure it was never enabled in the first place. I fumbled in my pocket for my keys, for anything that might work. My finger brushed against the cool metal of the pocket knife in my bag. I pulled it out. I wasn't thinking. I was just acting. I jammed the tip of the knife between the two metal contacts inside the detector. There was a spark. A loud, ear-splitting shriek erupted from the device, a piercing digital scream that filled the small apartment. It worked. The alarm itself worked. The shriek was a physical assault. I pulled the knife away and the noise stopped. My ears were ringing. My hands were shaking. I stood on the chair, breathing hard. My gaze fell on the plastic cover still in my other hand. As I turned it over, my thumb brushed against its surface. I felt it. A thin, raised line. I held it up to the dim light from the lamp. It wasn't a crack from me forcing it. It was a scratch. A deep, deliberate gouge near the edge of the casing, as if someone had used a screwdriver or a knife tip to pry it open before. A tool mark. Proof. Someone had been in here. Someone had stood on this same chair, opened this same device, and placed a dead battery inside. I had to warn the others. The thought was immediate, a reflex. I jumped down from the chair, not caring as it skidded away from me. I threw open my apartment door and ran across the hall to 4C Mr. Henderson's door. I pounded on it with the heel of my hand. The wood was solid. "Mr. Henderson!" I yelled, my voice loud in the quiet hall. "Mr. Henderson, wake up!" I pressed my ear to the door. I could hear the faint, muffled sound of his television. A game show, maybe. Laughter from a pre-recorded audience. But no footsteps. No voice. Nothing. I hammered on the door again, harder this time, my knuckles stinging. "There's gonna be a fire," "You have to get out." The only reply was the canned laughter from the television. He was old. Maybe he was a heavy sleeper. Maybe he had his hearing aids out. Maybe he was already dead. The thought was ugly and I pushed it away. He wasn't answering. I couldn't wait. I turned to the door opposite mine, 4A. I didn't know her name. I'd seen her in the hall a few times. Young. Always on her phone. I knocked. A quick, frantic rhythm. I heard movement inside. The sound of a chain being slid. A deadbolt turning. The door opened 2 inches, held by the brass chain. An eye peered out at me. She was wearing a bathrobe, her hair wrapped in a towel. She looked annoyed. "What?" she said. Her voice was sharp. "Listen to me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You have to listen. Call 911. There's going to be a fire in the basement. It's going to start soon." She stared at me. Her eyes scanned me from top to bottom. My dirty clothes, my grimy face, the wildness that must have been in my expression. Her face hardened, the annoyance replaced by fear. Not fear of a fire. Fear of me. "I know this sounds crazy," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "Please, just get out of the building. Tell people on your way down." "I'm calling the cops," she said, her voice low and hostile. "If you don't get away from my door right now, I'm calling the cops." "No, you don't understand." The door slammed shut in my face. The chain rattled violently as it was pulled tight. I heard the solid, definitive thud of the deadbolt being thrown. Then, another lock. I stood there, staring at the blank, painted wood of her door. The sound of her fear was louder than any alarm. I was the threat, not the fire. The lone man raving in the hallway was the only danger she could see. I was completely, utterly alone. The constriction was complete. I walked back to my apartment. I left the door ajar. I sat on the floor, my back against the couch, facing the hallway. I held the small kitchen fire extinguisher in my lap. It felt like a toy. The red canister was cold against my palms. I looked at the digital clock on the cable box. 10:47 p.m. I watched the numbers change. Red lines forming and reforming in the darkness. My world had shrunk to this single task. Me, a hallway, a set of stairs, and a clock. 10:48. My breathing was shallow. The sound filled my own ears. 10:49. I shifted my grip on the extinguisher. My knuckles were white. 10:50. The number flipped. The air in the room seemed to hold its breath. I waited. 1 second. 2. 3. A profound silence descended on the floor. Maybe he lied. Maybe it was part of the game. A false warning to make me jump at shadows. Then, I heard it. It wasn't a loud noise. It was a soft, wet squeak. The sound of a rubber-soled shoe on the worn linoleum tiles of the hallway. It came from the direction of the main stairwell, the one leading up from the lobby. I slid from the couch onto my stomach, the rough fabric of the carpet scratching my cheek. I crawled a few feet to my door, my head low. I pressed my eye to the peephole. The world outside was a warped, distorted fishbowl. The yellow light of the hallway was sickly. A figure walked into the frame. A man. He was wearing dark blue maintenance coveralls. On his head was a baseball cap pulled down low, obscuring his face. In his right hand, he carried a gray metal toolbox. He walked with a steady, unhurried pace. He wasn't sneaking. He was strolling. He walked right past my door, not even glancing at it. He was heading for the service door at the far end of the hall, the one that led down into the guts of the building. Down to the basement. My heart was a frantic, hammering drum against the floorboards. It was him. It was happening. My mind screamed at me to do something. Yell, run out there, tackle him. But my body was frozen. All I could do was watch through the tiny circle of glass. He reached the end of the hall. He put his toolbox down. He reached for the handle of the service door. And then, he stopped. He stood perfectly still for a long moment, his back to me. My breath caught in my throat. I watched a single bead of sweat trace a path down the inside of the peephole lens, distorting the image. Slowly, deliberately, the man turned his head. He didn't turn his body, just his neck, rotating with an unnatural smoothness. He looked back down the hallway. He looked right at my door, directly at the small, dark circle of the peephole where my eye was pressed. He knew. He knew I was there. He knew I was watching. The distance between us collapsed. It was no longer a man in a hallway. It was an eye looking back at mine. A wave of cold washed over me, so intense it felt hot. I couldn't pull away. I was pinned by his gaze. A shadow fell across his face from the brim of his cap, but I could see the shape of his mouth change. It was a smile. A wide, bright, friendly smile. It was the most horrific thing I had ever seen. He raised his left hand, the one not holding the toolbox. He lifted it in a small, casual wave. He wiggled 2 fingers, a gesture you might give a child. A quick, cheerful hello there. It was an acknowledgement. A greeting from the director to his lead actor. A confirmation that the show was underway, and my part in it was being observed with great interest. He held the wave for a 2 count. Then, his hand dropped. The smile vanished. He turned his head forward, gripped the handle of the service door, and pulled it open. He picked up his toolbox and stepped through, disappearing down the stairs into the darkness below. The heavy fire door swung shut behind him with a soft, final thump. He was gone. I lay on the floor, my eyes still pressed to the peephole, looking at an empty, yellow hallway. The dial tone in the payphone was a question. The fire was a threat. But that wave, that smile, that was the real message. This wasn't a punishment for my past sins. This wasn't random. This was personal. This was for an audience. And it was just getting started. I lay on the floor for a full minute after the service door clicked shut. The wood of the floor was hard against my ribs. My eye was still pressed into the cheap plastic of the peephole, staring at the empty, yellow-lit space where he had been. The image of his wave was burned onto the back of my eyelids. A cheerful, friendly gesture. A final confirmation. I pushed myself up. My arms trembled. The small red fire extinguisher felt heavy and useless in my lap. I placed it on the floor beside me. I looked at the cable box. 10:53 p.m. The world was moving again. I had 7 minutes. My mind, which had been a storm of racing thoughts, was now a single cold point of focus, the clock. I didn't move. I sat with my back to the couch, facing the door, which I had left open a crack. I listened. The building was a great, sleeping beast. The muffled sounds of Mr. Henderson's television, the hum of the refrigerator in my kitchen, the faint rush of traffic from the street below. Normal sounds. Nothing was out of place. Nothing except the man in the basement. 10:56. My throat was dry. I licked my lips. They tasted of salt and dust. 10:58. I tightened my grip on my knees. I could feel each bone in my fingers. The hallway outside my door was a sliver of yellow light and shadow. Unchanging. 11 o'clock. The number flipped on the clock. For a moment, nothing happened. A single, drawn-out second stretched into an eternity. Then the lamp on the end table flickered. Once. Twice. The light from the hallway shuddered. With a low buzz that seemed to come from inside the walls, every light in the apartment went out. The red numbers of the clock were now the only source of light, casting a bloody, digital glow on my hands. Darkness. And then, the smell. It wasn't the thick, organic smell of burning wood. It was thin and sharp, a chemical smell, like melting wires or burning plastic. It was faint at first, a suggestion carried on the draft coming from under the door. It wasn't a warning. It felt like an announcement. It was beginning, as he said it would. The tromboche remained silent. The white plastic circle on my ceiling was a dead eye in the dark. A coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with fear. It was the chilling certainty of being right. I knew. He had told me. And it was happening, on schedule, with the precision of a train timetable. I got to my feet. The plan was simple. The only plan left. Get to the fire escape at the west end of the building, 2 floors down. It was my only move. I grabbed the extinguisher. Its weight was a small comfort. My bare feet made no sound on the floor as I moved to the door. The brass knob felt cool in my hand. I pulled the door open wide. I stepped out. The hallway was not dark. Orange light pulsed from the main stairwell at the far end of the hall, the one I had just been told to avoid. It wasn't ablaze yet. It was a hungry glow, casting a long, dancing shadow of the handrail against the wall. And at the other end, where the service door was, a second light flickered. A harsher, brighter orange. It licked up from beneath the door, outlining it in fire. They weren't coming from the basement. They were at both ends of the hall. It was a pincer movement. The path wasn't blocked. It was erased. I stood frozen for a second, the extinguisher hanging by my side. The air in the hall was already warmer, carrying the sharp stink of chemical accelerants. A soft popping sound came from the direction of the main stairs, wood splintering in the heat. There was no escape. I backed into my apartment and slammed the door. The sound echoed in the sudden quiet of my room. The lock clicked shut. A pointless gesture. I was in a box. A cage. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed the damp towel off the counter, and lunged back to the door. I stuffed it into the crack at the bottom. Through the gap, before it was sealed, I could see the orange light brighten, pulsing like a heartbeat. The towel blocked the light, but not the truth. Then, a scream. It came from above. A woman's voice. High and sharp. It was cut off abruptly. A new sound started. A frantic banging. From next door 4C, Mr. Henderson. The banging was weak, muffled by the wall. It was a desperate, panicked drumming. It lasted for 10 seconds, then stopped. The trap wasn't for me alone. It was for all of us. I scrambled to my window, clawing at the lock. I threw it open. The night air was cool on my face, but it was already tainted with the smell of smoke rising from below. I looked down. I saw nothing. I looked up. The windows on the 5th and 6th floors were dark. No faces. No one trying to get out. A man yelled from somewhere across the hall. It wasn't words, just a raw, guttural roar of terror. I heard the crash of something heavy falling. Then, silence from that direction. The sounds were being extinguished, one by one. The building was being quietly, efficiently murdered. I stumbled back from the window. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My frantic preparations. Dragging the chair to check the smoke detector. Moving the magazines. Soaking the towel. These weren't acts of defiance. They were stage directions. He knew I would check the alarm. He knew I would find the dead battery. He knew I would try to warn the others, isolating myself in the process. He knew I would retreat here, to my prepared fortress. He hadn't trapped me in a fire. He had guided me into the safest seat in the house, the last one to go, so I could listen to the opening acts. He wanted to prolong it. He wanted me to hear this. The heat was building. I could feel it through the soles of my feet. The floor was growing warm. I put my hand on the apartment door. The wood was hot to the touch. The paint was beginning to feel tacky. A thin wisp of black smoke curled from the top of the doorframe, a lazy, unhurried line against the pale wall. Then, another. And another. They weren't seeping in anymore. They were pouring. The room was shrinking. The smoke was a ceiling that was slowly lowering itself upon me. My eyes began to water, then burn. A harsh, rasping cough tore from my lungs. I dropped to my knees, then to my stomach. The air was a fraction cleaner down here, but it was thick with a black, greasy grit that coated my tongue. I crawled away from the door, my chest heaving. The fire extinguisher lay where I had dropped it. A useless red idol. The coughing was constant now, a deep, painful spasm that left me gasping. My vision swam. The red numbers of the clock, 11:08, blurred into a smear of light. This was it. This was the end of the line. All the running, all the planning, all the panicked choices had led me here. To this patch of dirty carpet in this box, waiting for the fire to break through the door. I was going to die on the floor of my own apartment, choking on smoke. My head was light. The room tilted, and in that oxygen-starved moment, the final pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, not with a flash of insight, but with the cold, heavy finality of a cell door slamming shut. The woman. In 4A. I hadn't just knocked on her door. I had pounded on it. I had screamed about a fire. My face was wild, my clothes were filthy, my voice was cracking. "I'm calling the cops," she'd said. The fear in her eye wasn't of a fire, it was of me. The report she would make, the report she had probably already made, wouldn't be about a potential fire. It would be about the deranged man on her doorstep, raving, looking like a threat. Suspect number 1. The escape. Any sane person, smelling smoke, would have run. Down the stairs, out the door. But I didn't. I stayed. I had fortified my room. Blocked the door. I had an extinguisher right here with me. If by some miracle the fire department broke down that door and found me alive, what would they see? Not a victim. They would see a man who had prepared. A man who had barricaded himself in. A man who was waiting. A man who fit the description of the raving lunatic from a 911 call made minutes before the blaze started. The man in the maintenance coveralls. I was the only one who saw him. My word against nothing. Who would believe the wild-eyed survivor babbling about a smiling man with a toolbox? They would see my past. The one buried so deep. The hit and run. The guilt that I lived with every single day. A psychologist would have a field day. A man, crushed by the guilt of a past crime, finally snaps. He starts a fire to punish himself, to punish the world. He creates a phantom to blame. It was a perfect narrative. A clean, simple story, for the police, for the news, for a jury. He hadn't just set a fire. He had built a cage of logic and circumstance around me, and my own frantic struggles to get out were what had locked the door. Every action I had taken to save myself was another nail in my own coffin. Pounding on Mr. Henderson's door was not an act of charity. It was the act of an arsonist checking his work. Pleading with the woman in 4A was not a warning. It was a threat. My retreat into this room was not for survival. It was the hiding of a culprit. The smile. The wave. It wasn't just a greeting. It was a director admiring his set design. He hadn't just started a fire in a building. He had ignited the kindling of my life, my past, my guilt, and was standing back to watch the whole structure of my reality burn to the ground. Survive or die, my story was already written. And I was the villain. The floor was hot. It was the first thought that cut through the noise in my head. Not warm. Hot. The cheap, synthetic fibers of the carpet were searing into the skin of my cheek. I turned my head. A slow, painful motion. A cough ripped through me. A dry, violent spasm that felt like it was tearing my ribs from my spine. My lungs were on fire. Each breath was a pull of air thick with black grit and the sharp chemical taste of melted plastic. I pushed myself up onto my elbows. The room was a soup of shifting gray and black. Smoke hugged the ceiling, a thick, rolling canopy that was descending with a horrifying steadiness. The only light came from the blurred red numerals on the cable box, 1112, and the hungry orange pulse that bled through the cracks around the door. The damp towel I had stuffed there was a dark, useless lump. Smoke poured over it, around it, through it. My mind was a slideshow of failures. Pounding on Mr. Henderson's door, shouting at the woman in 4A, dragging the chair, checking the useless smoke alarm. Every move, every choice I had made to fight this, had been a step on a path laid out for me. He hadn't just predicted my actions, he had depended on them. I was a puppet, and my own frantic fear was the hand pulling the strings. The realization wasn't a comfort. It was a weight, pressing down on me harder than the smoke, hotter than the floor. It was the final turn of the key in the lock. Survive. And I was the arsonist. Die. And I was the arsonist who didn't get away. The story was finished. He was just burning the manuscript. Another cough seized me. It was deeper this time, wetter. I spit, and a dark glob hit the carpet. My vision swam. The red numbers blurred into a single streak of light. The box was getting smaller. The air was running out. I was dying on the floor, cataloging my own mistakes as the cause of death. I had to move. Not to escape. There was no escape. The window led to a fall. The door led to an inferno. It was a primal urge, the last twitch of an animal in a trap. I began to crawl. My bare knees scraped against the rough carpet. My hands, slick with sweat, searched for purchase in the grime. I didn't have a destination. I just crawled away from the door, away from the pulsing orange heat. My head swam. For a second, the image of another night flashed behind my burning eyes. The slick, wet glint of a dark road under my headlights. The shocking thud. The sound of metal twisting. The spray of glass. I saw a shape on the side of the road, a crumpled form that I never looked at twice. I just pressed my foot to the accelerator and drove. The guilt wasn't a memory. It was a physical thing. A shard of glass that had been lodged in my guts for years, and now the heat was making it glow. This was payment. A bill coming due. My hand hit something hard and cool. I looked down. Through the haze I saw the dark rectangle of my phone, lying on the floor near the leg of the sofa where it must have fallen. As I stared, its screen lit up. A single, clean rectangle of white light in the choking darkness. A low battery notification. 20%. It was an anchor, a solid object in a world that was dissolving into smoke and heat. It felt like the only real thing left. I crawled towards it, my movements sluggish. The air was getting thicker, heavier. Breathing was a conscious effort, each pull a painful scraping in my throat. I reached the phone. The light from its screen cast a pale, ghostly glow on my soot-stained hand. I lay there, chest heaving, staring at the screen. 11:14. Time was still moving. The world was still turning. And a thought, born not of logic but of pure, oxygen-starved desperation, flickered into existence. A thought so insane it could only have been formed in a dying brain. The calls. The voice on the phone. It had crossed time to reach me. The phone was the conduit. The weapon they used against me. What if the weapon could be fired in both directions? The thought took root. It was a single, impossible weed growing in the scorched earth of my mind. I could call him. Not the man in the coveralls. Me. I could call the Cole from 3 days ago. The Cole who was still just miserable, not terrified. The Cole who hadn't yet heard the first whisper of the static. I could warn him. Tell him to run. Tell him to get out of the city, to throw his phone in a river, to disappear before the first call ever came through. I could stop this. I could stop all of this, right here, right now. It wasn't a plan, it was a prayer. With a surge of purpose that felt like it came from outside my own body, I lunged for the phone. My fingers, clumsy and trembling, fumbled with the smooth glass. The smoke was a solid thing now, a black wall pressing down. I coughed, a long, rattling chain of them that left me dizzy and seeing stars. I squinted, trying to make my watery eyes focus on the tiny icons. I swiped. My thumb left a greasy black smear on the screen. Contacts. I tapped it. The list of names swam before my eyes. I scrolled past Al's Pizza, past dentist, past landlord, do not answer, and there it was. M.E. My own name, my own number. The one that had shown up on my caller ID just hours ago. The source, and the destination. A perfect, closed loop. My thumb hovered over the green call icon. The roar of the fire outside the door was louder now, a constant, hungry rumble. I could hear a sharp cracking sound, like a giant snapping a bone. The wood of the door giving way. I didn't have minutes, I had seconds. I pressed the button. The phone went to my ear. The plastic was hot against my skin. In my other ear, the inferno raged. But in this ear, I heard a sound that was so alien, so out of place, that it made the hairs on my arm stand up. A clean, digital ringing tone. 1 ring. 2 rings. It was working. Oh God, it was working. Then, a click. And a voice. My voice. Clear, healthy, annoyed. Yeah? It was me. It was me from 3 days ago, sitting in this same apartment, probably annoyed at a telemarketer. The sound of my own living, breathing voice was a punch to the gut. I opened my mouth to shout, to scream the warning, to pour every ounce of terror and pain from the last few days into a single, world-altering sentence. But my lungs were ruined. They were 2 bags of soot and fluid. When I tried to force the air out, all that emerged was a wet, strangled gasp, a choking, guttural noise. It wasn't a word. It was the sound of a man drowning. Hello? My past self said, the annoyance turning to confusion. Is anyone there? Don't. I tried again, squeezing my stomach, trying to force a single word out. The effort sent a fresh wave of blinding pain through my chest. A thin, reedy noise escaped my lips, mixed with a rattling cough. I could hear it through the phone, a horrible, distorted echo of my own dying. I heard myself, my past self, listening to it. I heard the sound I had heard 3 days ago. The faint, garbled noise. The indecipherable static. It was me. It had always been me. Look, some drunk got the wrong number, my past self said, his voice hard with impatience. Stop calling. The line clicked. He had hung up. Silence. The ringing in my ear was gone, replaced by the roar. The fire had broken through. A tongue of brilliant, violent orange licked around the top of the doorframe. The paint was bubbling, peeling back in black, curling strips. The heat was a physical blow, a solid wall that pushed me back. I lay on the floor, the phone still pressed to my ear. I had not been the victim of the calls. I was their author. I was the ghost in my own machine. The whole time, I had been running from my own echo. The fear, the chase, the final, elaborate trap. It wasn't a punishment from some cosmic entity or a smiling man in the basement. It was a suicide note I had mailed to myself, over and over, forever. My frantic attempts to escape the prophecy were what had fulfilled it. I wasn't a mouse in a maze. I was the architect of the maze, and I had forgotten the way out because there never was one. The phone slipped from my fingers. It landed screen up on the carpet. The screen was still lit. The smoke was so thick I could barely see it. A faint white square in the churning black. The wave of heat washed over me, and the last of the air was cooked out of my lungs. I opened my mouth, a final, reflexive gasp. The fire took the air. It took the sound. It took everything. And the last thought, the last words that formed in my mind before the orange consumed the world, were a simple, awful truth. A pronouncement, the first line of the story. It has begun.